911 for what city?
Please, Calgary, I'm freezing. Please, the police dropped me off here.
This was minus 28 in frigid Calgary weather, and he just left him there with no regard at all for his safety.
Growing up as a kid with my dad as a cop, they were my heroes. I couldn't believe that someone would be handled so aggressively when they're in handcuffs.
And this same guy goes around and beat up somebody in handcuffs again after he did that to me.
We do not have a just society if police can come to a wellness check, kick in a door, and shoot an unarmed man 4 times.
Calgary is often the city that has more officer-involved shootings than any other city in Canada.
They were flying under the radar with all of the misconduct happening within their ranks, but now they've been caught in very public ways. So the chickens have come home to roost for the Calgary Police Service.
Man, it was nice. Life was great when I came here. Like, there's so many opportunities, you know. There's jobs, Life was good before the whole incident. I knew where I was going. I knew what I was doing in my life. But then, after the incident, everything just kind of went downhill. This Calgary Police van pulled behind the car. They came out, told us to push the car. So I told him, hey, look, we tried to push the car. If you can't help us in any way, just leave us alone. To my surprise, they wrestled me to the ground. They put handcuffs on me, put me in the back of the police van. I was just like, what are you guys doing? Like, I haven't done anything wrong, so where are you guys taking me? They just kept on driving. They got to East Village. They stopped there. They took my handcuffs off and they told me to beat it. So they just got in the van and just drove off. So I'm stuck at this location. I don't know where I'm at. I'm from Africa. Where I'm from, you don't see none of this minus 25, minus 30. We don't see none of that. I was just wearing like a tracksuit. I didn't have gloves or no toque or anything. There's no buildings I can go stay warm. I'm scared. Like, I was panicking. I was feared for my life. And also all construction everywhere. Like cranes up here. I couldn't call the taxi at that time because my phone was dead. But I had a friend's phone that he had dropped when I went to go pick them up. My only option was to call 911.
Calgary Police, what's the address of your emergency?
Okay, Calgary cops picked me up for no reason, just left me here.
Left you where?
I don't know. They just left me here.
He told me it's only for emergency service. So they hanged up on me and I called again. He walked all across to where I was. Told me to stop calling 911 asking for help and stuff. He pushed me, I got up, trying to run away from him. He tasered me so quick. He put handcuffs on me and I just remember this guy just beating me up, punching me in the face, knees to the back. This is where he almost ended my life, right here. They put me in the police van, read me my rights, and said I was being charged for assaulting a police officer. At that time, I didn't really have much to say to them. Like, I was just so weak and like so broken down, you know, like just in so much pain. They finally took me out. I got on the train. I'm all bruised up, you know, lips busted up. I'm bleeding. And people are just looking at me like, what happened to you, you know? I called my friend. As soon as he walked in, he's like, holy shit. what happened to you, man? Then we went to the hospital, and when we got there, I was in so much pain, I could barely stand. So I stayed at my friend's house for like almost a week because I was scared to come home because they knew where I lived. I was having like flashbacks. The images just keeps repeating itself in my head, you know? So I was just terrified, man. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to be alone, I guess. I was like, man, I got to do something about this, you know? I can't just let them get away with this. I filed a complaint because I felt like I had to do something about it before it happens to someone again.
Taking that oath of allegiance, becoming a police officer provides you with an enormous amount of authority. Probably the most intimate form of government the public will ever deal with is the police. The fact that they could suspend your Charter of Rights and Freedoms, they could use force against you, they can do things to you that could forever upend your life, your family's life, comes with a high, specific need to be accountable.
At approximately 3 p.m. today, officers responded to a call from staff at a hotel for reports of a man behaving strangely. They took action to enter his room. The situation escalated, and as a result of his actions, a service firearm was discharged. Following standard procedures in an officer-involved shooting, the investigation is now being conducted by the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, also known as ACERT.
The crux of our investigation is going to focus on what happened and why they needed to gain entry and what occurred in that hotel room.
It was 3:30 in the morning or so, and I ran to the door, and it's Natalie, and she can hardly... she can hardly breathe.
And she was yelling out that Anthony's dead, that they've killed Anthony.
The Heffernan family brought their concerns to me, and I agreed to represent them. Anthony Heffernan winds up in a hotel room using drugs, and he overstayed his rental, wasn't answering the phone, wasn't answering the knocking of the door. So the hotel management, obviously being concerned about his welfare, phoned the Calgary Police Service. Bad move. Bad move. They force entry to the room. There's lots of yelling. They get close to him. 2 tasers were used. The sergeant and 3 other officers obviously did not see the need to use lethal force. Some constable, who we know to be McLaughlin, decided on his own to kill him.
Once we found out what ACERT is and like it's cops kind of investigating cops, and we're like, well, who has our back kind of thing.
Tom Engel with the Criminal Trial Lawyers Association is demanding more civilian oversight. He says police investigating police is not good enough.
They seem to be very sympathetic to the police officers and seem to accept their stories without critical analysis or investigation.
I am stunned to hear that comment.
Susan Hewson was emotional and defensive Thursday. The ACERT director says criticism the Serious Incident Response Team is biased toward police is unfair.
We are concerned that everybody gets fair treatment in this province. No one is above the law.
The more details we got, the angrier we kind of became. For these 5 officers to say that they fear for their lives is complete bullshit. There's no way 5 of them couldn't handle Anthony that day. with no weapon. Growing up on acreage was so much fun. There's always something to do outside. Anthony is just 3 years younger than me, and our birthdays are just a week apart. We shared our birthdays every year together, and he ended up being my best friend up until his death 4 years ago now.
Anthony was always laughing, extremely witty, but extremely caring and very generous. He was an electrician. It was a really great career for him. But I think also having a lot of access to so much money at such a young age, he kind of fell into spending it in the best ways often. So he hated his addiction. And to be honest, he lived a very sober life for the couple years before he died. He relapsed, going into the hotel room. The reaction from people, well, he was an addict and, he kind of deserved it, or, he's the one who put himself there. If he wasn't there, it wouldn't have happened, I mean, he was our brother and he died in a way that he shouldn't have died. And if we were going to take anything to try to make the world better, we had to have a voice for him.
We do not have a just society if police can come to a wellness check, kick in a door, taser, and shoot an unarmed man 4 times, once in the chest, and 3 times in the head. Anthony was not a threat to anyone. This must never happen again in Calgary or Canada.
So while ASERT is still investigating whether a criminal act occurred by Constable McLaughlin shooting Anthony Heffernan, it seems to be obvious that you don't let that officer out on the street to shoot another person.
The same officer that killed Anthony was back to work and was also involved in another shooting. And that was the craziest. I just couldn't believe it. You know what I mean? Like, is that just the mentality of the Calgary Police? Like, they don't care at all? Like, put him back to work. He's fine. Mr. Anthony Heffernan deserved it.
The following program may contain violence and scenes disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
I thought they were going to drop the charges, but then after like a year or so, I spoke to my lawyer. She's like, yeah, this is going to go to trial, so get ready.
The only basis by which Godfred was charged with assault was that there was some sort of gesture. There was never any allegation that he'd actually hit anybody or pushed anybody or had any physical contact. Of course, I've heard before stories from people who have been charged with assaulting a police officer and have said that they, in fact, were the ones assaulted, so it wasn't anything new to me, but his demeanor really drew my attention. He kept saying that it's a construction site, there's got to have been some video there, somebody had to have a camera there, you've got to get the cameras and show what happened to me. And so that was really remarkable for me. Why would he be encouraging me to try and get evidence of what he was telling me if he were making something up? So we're back in courtroom 1008. This is the very courtroom where Godfred was prosecuted. The day of the trial, I felt scared for Godfred. 3 uniformed police officers standing up under oath and telling their version of events, and Godfred standing on his own. I didn't feel confident, and I felt scared for him. The trial commenced with Constable Denockley. He conceded that he had thrown Godfred to the ground. That event ended with Denockley putting Godfred into a police vehicle and then, for no logical reason, drove away from that scene and just left him off on a street corner wearing a little sweat jacket and a pair of sweatpants. This was minus 28 in frigid Calgary weather, and he just left him there with no regard at all for his safety. Looking at the video, I see Godfred handcuffed. The police officers are dragging him along, and he kind of falls, or maybe he is trying to stand up, but ultimately he falls to his back. And then we see the police officer punching him in the head. It looks like he's kneeling on one knee and striking him with his other knee repeatedly around the head and chest and upper body area. And there is no possibility that Godfred is in any way resisting or attacking. He's on the ground, on his back, with his hands cuffed, pulled up above his head, and there is no escape. There is no escape for that kid.
Like, with all this evidence, with all these videos and everything, they still went on with the trial, and they actually tried to lock me up for doing nothing.
Sure about you need EMS? Negative, but the back arrow.
It makes me feel like he's like profiling me, you know? Like, you just did this to me. Who is the bad guy? The guy who puts an innocent guy in handcuffs, taser him, beat him up for no reason? Or the guy that needed help and got tortured? Who is the bad guy?
Judge McElhargy found that the police officers were not credible and was not able to find in any way that Godfred assaulted the police officer, and Godfred was acquitted. Had we not had a video recording, we would have had Godfred standing up in court and saying, the police officers are lying. And I can't imagine any judge going out on a limb and saying, you're right, it's you that's telling the truth. That would have been a very hard sell for Godfred. Godfred's therapy, his legal fees, there is no compensation. He's intended to just feel fortunate that he's been found not guilty and move on.
I went through like 5-6 lawyers in Calgary. Nobody was willing to take on the case. My defense lawyer, she referred me to a lawyer in Edmonton, Tom Engel.
It was a travesty that he was ever arrested, ever charged. Once the charge is laid, it goes to the Calgary Crown, and they have to thoroughly review all of the evidence. Now they have to decide whether they have a reasonable likelihood of conviction, and if they do, whether it's in the public interest to prosecute Godfred. Looking at this whole scenario, is it in the public interest to prosecute this man? The answer to me would be clearly no. There's a failure there. These checks and balances, none of them worked.
I was living with my girlfriend, but I couldn't work due to my back injuries and stuff. And bills is piling up and piling up and piling up, and she's paying the bills and I'm just sitting at home. After me and my girl broke up, I was homeless. 6 months, sleeping on my friend's couch in the basement. I went through all that back pain and the stress. The stress makes the pain even worse, you know?
When I first met Godfred, he hadn't a permanent home and was very lonely, very disenfranchised. It was evidence that he had severe PTSD. He was highly symptomatic and his trauma was profound. He was having nightmares, he was having flashbacks, he was really afraid of the police. If Godfred was walking down the street and saw a police van, for example, it would create in him a need to flee or a need to react in some deep way that's fear-based. It's a horrible feeling.
I think any Calgarian would be very disturbed about this kind of misconduct and the fact that these officers are still working. As far as I know, they're still out in the field. Let's remember that Godfred is black. You know, let's not lose sight of that.
I think that there's a racial issue here. I think that there's a bully factor here. But I can guarantee you, if my son was in that BMW X5, it would have been a completely different outcome. And that really bugs me. Or for white girls. They would have been taking them out for coffee.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. This has been an incredibly difficult case. The conclusion was that based on my review of all of the evidence, that there was evidence capable of constituting reasonable grounds to believe an offense or offenses had been committed under the Criminal Code. As is required under the Police Act, ACERT must forward their investigation to the Crown in those circumstances, and we did so.
ACERT had recommended charges to the Crown's office, and so I think people were expecting that this might be one of those rare cases where charges were going to be laid against the officer.
The Deputy Minister of Justice was there, and he is the head prosecutor of all the prosecutors in Alberta. And he was there, and we don't know why he was there. Our understanding is that it's never taken place before.
Following a thorough review of the evidence, a close analysis of the relevant law, the application of the standard for commencing prosecutions, it's our determination that there will not be a prosecution in this case. Ultimately, there was simply not sufficient evidence that the officer's use of force was unjustified. And as such, in these circumstances, there's not a reasonable likelihood of conviction resulting from the use of force, and there will not be a prosecution.
He said basically that they couldn't disprove that the officer was using reasonable force. And so Panna went on to say that the officer had no other choices.
In the circumstances that the officer found himself in, there were no reasonable alternatives to taking the steps that he did.
And that naturally is completely wrong. He had lots of choices. It does not make sense. And you wonder, how would a prosecutor ever come out with a statement like that?
Well, I'm completely devastated. We really actually thought in the last 17 months that clear and just thinking would prevail. But it didn't.
So we were very disheartened, to say the least.
I often wonder how they all sleep at night. Maybe just fine. We don't. You know, I often wonder, does McLaughlin have a full night's sleep? Does Eric Topanen? Just
another day in the life of the Calgary Police.
Yeah.
Another one dead and another one buried, and let's forget about it.
An officer who has been on the force for about a year fired her gun, killing a 27-year-old woman. This is the 10th officer-involved shooting in Calgary this year, 5 of them fatal.
Calgary is often the city that has more officer-involved shootings than any other city in Canada. And I don't know what the reason for that is.
In an ideal world, the prosecution and the police should be separate. But in the real world, the prosecution and the police work very, very close together. Clearly, they're operating above the law.
A lot of Crowns get the mistaken impression that the police are part of the team. The Crown will say, I have to go talk to my officers. I have to make sure it's good with them. What difference does it make? You're in charge here. It has to be good with you. You can't care about what the police think about this. So make no mistake, there is pressure. And it's not just pressure in whether to prosecute an officer or carry on a prosecution. There is pressure brought to bear in any case where the police conduct is at issue, including cases where the police have brought the charges against a citizen.
I grew up in Ghana, helping my uncle repair cars and stuff like that. And came to Canada, I wanted to be a heavy duty mechanic as well. That's what I wanted to do. But after this incident, I had to drop everything because, I mean, how am I going to be a heavy-duty mechanic with back problems, right? Prior to this incident, I didn't have no health issues. I was strong and healthy, and I was a go-getter, you know? But after the back injuries and all this stuff, it just kind of slowed me down. I filed a complaint 5 years ago, and nothing has been done about it. All these officers are still working. Who knows what they're doing out there?
Good afternoon. On Monday, May 25th, 2015, police were called for reports that a man had broken into his ex-girlfriend's residence and stolen a number of items. The man was located nearby and placed under arrest. Officers pulled into the parking lot behind the court services section and removed the man from the back of the marked police vehicle. At this time, an altercation took place between one of the officers and the man, resulting in the man being thrown to the ground while handcuffed.
I was contacted by the brother and sister-in-law of the alleged victim of this officer, and they came to me with this video.
After seeing what had actually happened, I knew that people needed to see it. I knew that what had happened wasn't right. Growing up as a kid with my dad as a cop, they were my heroes. I would see another police officer and he would remind me of my dad. And there was a point where I did think about becoming a police officer. I couldn't believe that someone would be handled so aggressively when they were in handcuffs. No one deserves to have that done to them, whether they're an addict or not.
Daniel came to our office. His understanding was that he was under investigation for an assault of the very officer who ended up being charged. That's not unusual in my area. Typically speaking, that is the charge that people end up leaving with because the police needed justification for applying force. While Daniel was in hospital, they had to drill a hole into his head so that they could relieve the pressure from the injuries to his brain. He had suffered traumatic brain injury, and it was affecting him going forward.
His memory was affected. He couldn't remember things that you might have told him 5 minutes before. I know it was hard on him when he was going to the rehab places and forgetting that he had meetings and stuff like that.
He was wanting to get some recognition that this was wrong. And ultimately the plan was to sue, but he never made it that far.
And the man arrested, how was he doing with his injuries?
He recovered from those injuries, but he has subsequently passed away as a result of unrelated events.
I don't know where that comment about him being fully recovered would have come from. Short-term memory loss was one of the problems from the traumatic brain injury. So if he's kicked out of treatment as a consequence of short-term memory loss and then immediately goes into drug-seeking behavior, it's hard to say those two things are not related, at least in the general sense.
The officer who's been charged, not been named. Is this in relation to something of a domestic nature?
No. Because the officer was on duty in the execution of his duties, we've decided not to name him in this incident.
And it's just upsetting, you know? Like, this is the same guy that I filed a complaint against him. The police force knew the evidence, they seen the videos. They didn't do anything to protect the public. And this same guy goes around and beat up somebody in handcuffs again after he did that to me.
Godfred makes a complaint within about a month of the misconduct. So the Calgary Police Service is well aware of what Lindsay did. Anybody would look at this, consider Godfred's complaint, and would know that this is a serious problem. What do they do about Lindsay in the meantime? Nothing. They let him loose on the citizens of Calgary to inflict this damage on Howarth.
I think that until a conclusion was drawn as far as that first incident, he should have just been behind a desk. It seems like it's an egregious error by the management at Calgary Police Service.
Trial is underway for a Calgary police officer charged with aggravated assault. The Crown prosecutor says a 2015 arrest by Constable Trevor Lindsay left a man with a fractured skull and a brain bleed.
In order to avoid a conflict of interest or even the appearance of a conflict, they have brought in prosecutors from Edmonton as well as an Edmonton judge, not knowing who Constable Lindsay might have come into contact with in his capacity as a Calgary police officer.
From a lawyer's perspective, looking at this, it didn't seem like anything that Daniel did on that video warranted 3 successive punches and being thrown straight to the ground. Of course, he can't put his hands in front of him to save himself from the fall. He's not assisted in any way that I can see by the officer from striking the ground. And then he does. And it appears he goes headfirst right into the pavement. And he doesn't move after that.
1117. You just had to recall that our male staff let at us. We're code 15, but he's going to need EMS in a bad way.
10-4.
After he throws Danny to the ground, you see him walking around, and he is obviously agitated. I imagine in his mind he's saying, how am I going to get myself out of this one? So I'm going to close this door, take these photos. You know, here comes the sergeant. I want him to see that I'm worried that I have this guy's blood on me. My opinion of all of this is obviously, one-sided. Like, this is my brother, but there are things that are right there that make him look extremely guilty, I think.
Lindsay described Howarth as combative and argumentative. And then after that first punch that he delivers to Howarth, he describes Howarth as sort of twisting to spit, at least in his direction, and fearing that that spit was mixed with blood. He said he was terrified that he was going to contract some kind of disease.
If there was spitting, it certainly could not have been in the direction of the officer from the angles visible on the video. So if he was spitting, it would have been in the direction of the car or the pavement somewhere.
So under cross-examination, Trevor Lindsay talked about the notes that he wrote following this incident. So he took incredibly detailed notes, 19 pages of notes. But in those notes, he never mentions those 3 punches that we can see on the video right before that takedown.
Like, I was trying to leave my mind open to the truth of the matter. And after sitting in trial, the truth of the matter is that that guy just snapped and hurt my brother. And he doesn't show a single sign of remorse. Like, it doesn't seem like he thinks he did anything wrong.
Police Chief Roger Chaffin is calling it quits just 3 years into his 5-year contract. He's dealt with some major issues during his time, including harassment and bullying in the force and a spike in police shootings.
Roger Chaffin campaigned to become chief on policies of transparency and accountability. And in fairness to Chaffin, he followed through on those things. So we started seeing more officers named. But what that did was really upset the membership.
I did tell them when I started that I will not be very popular for doing the things I'm going to do, but they must get done. And I'm hopeful I've worn a lot of that the next chief doesn't have to redo it again. They don't have to go back and revisit some of these painful issues.
because he's got a uniform and a badge and a gun, don't mean he can go around beating people in handcuffs. Like, nah, it's not acceptable, man.
So the judge read portions from his 30-page written decision, and essentially he found that Haworth, after he had been initially punched in the face, had the need to spit blood. He had it collected in his mouth, and in fact, he had spat blood towards the back of the police car, so nowhere near the officers. The judge also found that Lindsay could have controlled the situation by simply keeping Haworth pressed up against his police cruiser, that he had control of that handcuffed suspect, and it was only in the moments where he was hauling Haworth away from the police car that things sort of got out of control, and that's when the punching occurred. Essentially, the judge found that none of the use of force was justified.
I'm happy to see justice served, and I'm glad with the judge's decision. The last time we were in court, I saw Howard's mom crying. It really got to me, like, here is this poor lady, you know, losing his son. And I think if they had done something about it when I filed the complaint, maybe Howard would still be alive, you know?
Not every cop is going out there hurting people. There's cops out there that are giving addicts like my brother mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and rushing them to the hospital to try and save their life, right? Police officers, I think, need to still be held accountable for their actions. Yes, they have a hard job. Not everyone can do their job, but that doesn't give them an excuse to abuse their power.
Frustrating, like not being able to work, family members calling you from back home, asking for financial help, and my moms and, you know, sisters and cousins, and, you know, and it hurts, you know, to not be able to help them out. Like, it's just very frustrating.
It's been more than 5 years, and the investigation's not done. So they will prosecute at the drop of a hat somebody who is alleged to have committed an offense against a police officer. And they will carry that right on, just like they did in Godfred's case. Yet it should have been plain as day that there were police officers who should have been charged. Godfred's case clearly illustrates the double standard in that regard. Unfortunately, that's the way it is in a lot of cases.
There's been a lot of assumption that because he's from outside the organization, he will be the silver bullet to all our problems, or the magic pill to all problems. I think that's unfair. So to put so much on him is unrealistic.
A lot of people are waiting to see what the next police chief will do in terms of naming officers or coming out, you know, in the hours after there's been a shooting, what they'll say.
I think for too long, organizations have done this where when something goes wrong, they hang out an individual to dry, and then they say, well, you know, there we go. We dealt with that. You know, Bob was bad, and we dealt with Bob, and now we're good. But I think, you know, this bad apples versus bad barrel, they're very different things. And I think we've always got to be looking at the barrel to make sure it's not the barrel that is actually tainting the apples.
I would put a lot of confidence that he's the right kind of person, but what's everybody else going to do? People are going to have to let go of the past and start looking at what do we need to do to create a more vibrant, more positive organization, and I hope they give him the chance to do that.
Hopefully one day all this will be over and and take a trip back and go see the family and, just relax, enjoy some good food and just enjoy my country, But yeah, hopefully one day soon I'll be going back. I still get like serious anxieties when I see cops. I get this anger, But then again, not all cops are bad cops, right? But in my eyes, they're all the same because in my situation, there was like how many cops involved and nobody did the right thing. So where is the good one? Like,
It's hard to explain to my son that his grandfather was a police officer. Don't be scared of cops. They're there to protect you, right? Because when he first saw the video, he came to me like absolutely destroyed, right? This is his uncle that he loved. He was terrified that it was going to happen to him. He was asking me, well, what if I get arrested? Am I going to get beat up? Which is sad. And I have so many emotions and thoughts in my head. And of course, I'm not going to say anything negative about the police to my son because I want him to be able to feel confident calling the police if he's in trouble, not scared to call them.
It was so traumatic. It was so traumatic for all of us. Oh my goodness. And it has affected, our kids as well. in all sorts of different ways.
People often say, how are things going, whatever, and they hate to bring it up. And we'll say it's always with us. Never worry about that. It's always with us. Usually the first thing I think of when I wake up, and it's always the last thing I think about when I go to sleep at night. Injustice is an awful thing.
This July, Saturday means great movies.
What do you mean?
Because Saturday is movie night in Canada.
She looks like a movie star.
I think this is totally going to work.
Bring it. It all starts at 10 on CBC.
You should upload it. I'm not going to share it.
Oh, you like her.
There's a website. It has students on it, and they're naked.
Who did that?
All I did was send it to one person.
It was meant just for you.
The kids don't remember what you try to teach them, but they do remember what you are.